I can never get tired of hearing that song. Welcome, everybody, to The Created Economy. It's our weekly interview series where my co-hosts, Greg and I, chat with the players from the creator economy at large and discuss the key topics impacting the growth of the industry. You can catch all new episodes on Wednesdays and find out more about us on our website at createdeconomy.com. And while you're searching for us, feel free to follow us everywhere on social media at Created Economy on Twitter. Like and subscribe our videos on YouTube at Created Economy. And for all the news that we are curating around the creator economy, go to flipboard.com/@createdeconomy. And with that, why don't we bring on, you know who I forgot to bring on? I forgot to bring on Greg. Hey, Greg.
I forgot to mention the creator economy.
The creator economy? Did I not say creator economy enough times? I'm just doing this for SEO purposes.
I'm glad this is a drinking game.
And it's also good that we are recording in the morning or afternoon, so it's not at night. So you're drinking coffee instead.
You can listen and drink whenever you choose. That's the power of the podcast.
No one will ever know. All right. Well, Greg, how are you doing today?
I am happy to be sitting upright after being completely sick for 3 days straight. So,
this is a
welcome improvement over yesterday.
Did you get sick from after going to CEX?
I went to CEX and I was sick after it. Whether or not those two are related is, there's no causality.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. There's no correlation between the two, but it's like I've seen a couple of people that just obviously have gone traveling to various other places and have come back.
Basically, what I figured out is that me being around any strangers is basically going to make me sick now from 2 years of being of just my family.
Your immunity has waned. All right. And with that note, let's bring on our guest. Her name is Rachael King. Rachael and I actually know each other from back in the day when I was a reporter, and she was it WAG or Rover? I can't recall.
Dog Vacay, who was acquired by Rover. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, I knew it was one of the different variations.
One of the pet marketplaces.
Yeah. And I was always a sucker for getting pitched anything that involved dogs. So I love dogs. So Rachael always knew how to tug at my heartstrings and say, "Here you go, great." But yeah, so now Rachael is a founder, a co-founder. She has started a company called Pod People, an amazing company, especially very relevant because it's all about podcasting. And hi, you're listening to a podcast or you're watching a podcast. So we figured let's bring on an expert to help us figure out how we can do better. And with that, Rachael, thank you so much for joining Greg and I on the show. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'd love that. So Pod People, exactly as you said, aptly named. We are a marketplace for podcast production. So we have a full service production team and we make podcasts for, Fortune 500s like Optum and Intuit, a lot of startups such as Lattice and Chief, and some great media companies like Netflix and People Magazine, InStyle. So the thing that's different about us from other production companies is that we are powered by a talent network, a community that we've built of 2,500 audio professionals. So professional producers, editors, engineers, sound designers, you name it, people who make the wonderful podcasts that you listen to every day, like This American Life and Radiolab and Valley Heat. That's my new favorite one that no one's ever heard of. So give that a listen if you don't know it. Very funny. So we are able to put together the perfect team for any kind of show, no matter the genre or the format, and of course, subject matter expertise. Even if having a producer or a scriptwriter with a certain identity matters to the show. We're doing one for Spotify and Invisible Hand right now for Pride Month. So that entire production team identifies as queer, and just having the people who are making the content and behind the scenes, so to speak, also understanding the perspective of the work that they're making, it makes a huge difference. And this talent pool really is like our secret sauce to everything that we do. And so obviously it's a community. So we have a discussion group where people can help each other out. We have a mentorship program. We do all kinds of educational events to help people level up. And most recently, we started a pod pipeline to be able to get their original ideas to the development execs in audio world who are commissioning and funding, original works. So the Wonderies and Netflixes and Spotify's of the world who are looking for the next big podcast idea. So, we have their ear because they are our clients. And so it's really easy for us to then, play matchmaker and be attached to the production company and put the creator at the center of our team. And get their ideas made. So getting the ideas down from the little guys up to, the big wallets, so to speak.
Rachel, let me ask a question just for folks that maybe don't understand.
Yeah.
A little bit me. Why does all this matter? Like, I think folks don't necessarily know, everyone doesn't quite understand what it takes to produce a great podcast, I guess, right? So like, could you unpack a little bit more about, I get there's all these roles. Do you, it's kind of like, when do you need all of these things, and sort of like, how do people evolve? Like, what's that journey like from like, do you start versus like, do you need this support network? And are you a way to start better than you might if you just went and downloaded Anchor like we did?
Yeah. So I feel like there's 4 stages, right, of podcast production. The first is you're doing it yourself. You're scrappy. You're just trying to figure out if this is something that resonates with you, if it's something you're going to stick with. And in those days, it really does make the most sense to do it yourself. It's probably good for you to learn a little bit of editing. Most, MacBooks have GarageBand, so you have something built in that's pretty easy to do in the beginning. And if you make it past 6 to 10 episodes, then you probably are going to stick with it. And that's where most people fall off. So if you make it past that point, at some point in that first year, I think you'll get to level 2, which is, okay, I really need to outsource some of the production process or editing, depending on where your skill set lies. So are you better at booking the talent and preparing for the guests and doing more of the producer role on the front end where you're making sure that you're capturing great content? Or are you better at the post-production side where you want to do a tight edit? So you would outsource one or the other. And so the second stage is kind of like you have one person who's helping you either with the producer side, editing side, or both. And so they might be just mixing it, editing, putting the music in, or they might be helping you book guests, for et cetera. The next level, that's when we're really the first stage of professional. So that's mostly what we're doing is we have a team of between 3 to 6 people, give or take, on any brand production that we're doing. So we'll have an executive producer, a senior producer, sometimes an assistant producer, depending on how much in-depth research there is, how much talent booking. We will often have a talent booker as well, especially for the shows like People and In Style, who are really going after that A-list celeb talent or expert talent for other shows. We always have an editor, of course, a sound designer, an engineer, and that's kind of the core team for any professional show. Then as you're doing something more involved, such as something investigative that really needs to have, journalistic fact-checking, reporting, Ken, a little something about that, all the way up to like the dailies of the world, which are not only doing that, but they're doing it on a daily cadence. So I think last time I checked, they had between 40 and 50 employees just working on the daily, not New York Times audio, but just the daily. So that'll give you, that I would say is the biggest level. So we usually hover in that third tier where it's professional, and we have a team of somewhere between 3 and 6 people, depending on the scale of the show that we're making for a company or brand.
So you work with, you mentioned all these different brands like L'Oreal, Spotify, People, Travel and Leisure, and like Twitter, Netflix, Spotify, NBC News, Medium. I find it fascinating that these big brands, right, would need some help in terms of doing podcasting in general, right? I think you're like, oh, you're a big brand, like you should have that expertise, or you should be able to hire the expertise in house. But is that just a myth? Is it that they might be experimenting in podcasting, and they're like, hey, we need somebody who can hit the ground running, that has all the access and all the connections and the relationships, or the technical expertise to just at least get this up without a steep learning curve. And so that's why they would say, Rachel, can your team help us out with this? I
Yeah.
mean, what is and also what is the appeal of podcasting now, by brands?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, like why outsource, basically, there's a few different reasons. So for a media company, it's often a bandwidth thing. So they might be so busy and stretched so thin that it makes more sense to outsource at least in the beginning and see if it's something that they want to continue on with versus making the upfront investment of bringing people in-house. Often they've never done an audio strategy before too, and it is really different. You want to make sure that the podcast isn't this siloed special project off to the side. It shouldn't be just an experiment. It should be something that is woven into your overall content and marketing strategy for the year. And, podcasts are really good at the same things as PR, but you have more control over the content and the story, obviously. So when we're making a podcast for a company or a brand, we're like, what are your content goals for the year? How can this help nudge people in the right direction? Like if we're working with a candidate, we think about, for example, we have, talking to some candidates who are going to do political podcasts leading up to the midterms. Great. So if social media, you think of that as the soundbite that you want to circulate and reverberate. But then if anyone wants to go deeper and really get to know who you are, they might not be able to come to an event for obvious reasons, geography, COVID, what have you. And so being able to listen to someone's podcast it gives you the context. So we've been saying social media is the soundbite and the podcast is the context. It lets people who are interested in you as a brand, as a person, go deeper and get to know, what do you really care about? What are your values? What are the stories relevant to what you're doing that are interesting? So for example, Ben and Jerry's doing all of these, podcasts about racism and how we need to change this country going forward, which is very in line with their brand values for anyone who's ever known Ben and Jerry's. So it's similar in terms of content marketing, where you shouldn't just be an advertisement for whatever you're trying to do, but it should plug into that. We also will create a zillion different assets from the podcast that can be used on blog, in your newsletter, on your website, obviously on social, so that you're getting 1,000 different uses out of this half hour to an hour episode. And obviously there's lots of different reasons. So for some brands, they're actually trying to create a new revenue channel. So for Meredith Corporation, now Dotdash Meredith, one of their initiatives was like, we want to reach a new audience, and podcasting is largely a different audience than who was traditionally reading the magazines. So we've been working with them for 2 years, and now they have a whole network of podcasts. So it can be used for content marketing. It can also be used for a new revenue stream, obviously. It is much better for not top of funnel, so getting in front of people who've never heard of you before, but pulling people down through the funnel, making them fall in love with you. That's what they're really good for. And they're so sticky. I mean, if you think about someone looking at a passing tweet or Instagram, you're capturing half a second of their attention versus someone giving you 30 minutes to, go dive in deep to something. Is so powerful.
Gotcha. So let's take a step back. What is the appeal of podcasting to you? I know you talked about how podcast offers you more context, very similar to like you made the apt analogy of social media as the soundbite. Podcasts are gives you the context. But for you, what is your history in terms of technology, and what led you to say, you know what, I want to start this company, and the company I want to do is focused on helping people produce podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what led you to that founder role?
Yeah. So I was running, after I left Dog Vacay, I started my own PR firm focused on early stage tech companies in Los Angeles. I was there at the time. And I had a lot of my clients start to ask me about creating a podcast as part of their content marketing, because I had just a hobby show for fun. I've been a huge fan of podcasts even before I moved to LA. But once I was in Los Angeles and I had a commute from West Hollywood to Santa Monica, they saved me. And I just felt deeper and deeper in love, especially as more were being made and better, more interesting content, different kinds of content. And so when I realized brands, I had even just a couple inquiries from companies who wanted to do this as part of their branding marketing strategy. And I thought, oh my God, my career I saw that social media was going to be something that brands were going to leverage as part of their content marketing years and years ago. And I was like, well, I'm already a power user of social media. I can absolutely figure out how to do that for Hyatt, And then that sort of happened for blogging and, the different kinds of content marketing that I was overseeing at, Sidecar and Dog Vacay in my startup days. And I just thought, this is the next one. Like, brands, I think, the smart ones are going to need to figure out what their audio strategy is. And if I can get out ahead of that and be sort of leading the charge in terms of what that looks like for, branding and audio strategy, then we'll be in a really good position. And I was lucky. It was like 2017. So, the year of Serial, I think Serial was 2016. So like around that time. And the first couple branded shows had come out. GE did The Message, which is still one of my favorites today. It's so good. And so, yeah, I just got lucky. And then I had my Rolodex from being in communications and content marketing world for so long. So it was not a huge stretch. I think one of the first shows we made was with Ryan Lawler when he'd gone in-house at Samsung Next. And that was the first podcast that we made as Pod People, 5 years ago.
Oh, I had no idea that you worked with Ryan back in the day.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Ryan Lawler, ex-TechCrunch, and now he's at Axios, reporting on finance, fintech stuff. Sorry.
Yeah.
Quick side thing real quick. You said you worked at Sidecar also. Did you work with Maria Agnaba?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. She was head of community. I think we overlapped for only a month or two, but I loved her.
She's my wife.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Let me tell you, I felt so guilty about leaving because I loved the team there so much, but I was offered the job at Dog Vacay to be head of communications, and I wanted to move to LA, so I couldn't pass it up. But knowing that she was coming in gave me like complete peace of mind that she would be taking over the community.
I remember doing one of the first Sidecar rides when there was still like you could gift.
Oh man.
It was painful.
It was wild. It was a wild time. Yeah.
we shared an investor actually, which is how I got to know Sidecar originally.
Oh, cool. I love it.
Yes, to follow up a little bit on Ken's question, I guess, so I love hearing your story. Obviously, I love hearing how everyone becomes an entrepreneur. Today, I just came back from the CEX conference. It's the, Creator Economy Expo, but, sort of Joe Pulizzi puts on the event, ran Content Marketing World. He's coined this term, sort of content entrepreneurs, which we love. And I really liked hearing that some people are adding this as a revenue stream. I guess, how do you see the space shaping up, and what kind of interest have you had, not from maybe like necessarily large brands, but maybe up and coming or individual? Like, are you seeing this space move in this direction now? Like, who are the new entrants in the podcasting realm, like from, your experience and what you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's definitely trickled down. I feel like the first few years, it was like the Morgan Stanleys of the world, who had enough money to be like, why not? Sure. And now, in the last 6 months, even, we've seen a lot more of our clients have raised between 10 and $70 million. So in that Series A, Series B realm, whereas before, it was really public companies or like Series D and later had at least $100 million raised. So we're definitely seeing an uptick in the startup world, which is really exciting because that's where I came from, So I'm like, God, if there's anything I know how to do, it's help like a Series A, Series B company get their messaging out in the right way. And I speak the language, which I think is an advantage coming from a creative agency, being able to straddle both worlds. Which Randy Zuckerberg was talking about a little bit. I really loved her being the creative and the business brain together. I really related to that. But yeah, we're seeing a huge uptick in startups realizing that this is a fairly low cost way compared to, a video production that needs lighting and needs a studio ideally and all of that. It's a very low cost way to create really sticky, high quality content that you can then use in a zillion different ways. And again, you have complete ownership over the story. But there is something about hearing people's voices talk as a listener, where you trust it more because you can hear the emotion, you can hear how much someone cares, whereas you sometimes don't get that when you're reading an article. I think, I don't know, we're trained to respond to the human voice in a different way.
Can you talk in terms of the commitment on your part and on the brand's part? I would imagine that it is, in most cases, it's you operate more on the uh, teach a man to fish versus give a man a fish. Is would that be fair? Because I'm thinking like if you when you engage these big brands, or engage a client, and they may say, I want to do a podcast. You know, I'd imagine that there's some strategy work where you would sit down with them and say, okay, why do you want to create a podcast? What
Mhm.
kind of podcast you want to create?
And maybe
Is it
you shouldn't create a podcast. Sometimes we have
exactly?
clients come to
It,
us where we're like,
It,
you
it
actually
feels
need to do podcast ads on other podcasts, and we can
it
make them for you.
feels it feels more like a build versus buy than a
Hmm.
fish versus not fish, though, right? Because if I understand what Rachel's doing right, you can fractionalize a bunch of skills, right?
Mhm.
Like from a network of people that otherwise you would have to sick HR on finding and recruiting and
Yeah.
uh, securing, and then also that locks you into a certain mindset or skill set that if you suddenly wanted to try something different, you'd end up going back out to another
Right.
right person.
Well, I mean, that's another reason that we have an advantage too. So we get two kinds of clients that we work with, really. Ones who, think they can't afford the full service production yet, or they have in-house resources. To your point, there are some who are like, we can do this. We just need you to help us develop the show and create a blueprint, maybe of a pilot episode, and then we can take it from there. And when we have enough money, we'll come back to you to do full service production. When we're ready to invest more for a whole team, we'll come back to you then. So we'll do a development workshop, figure out exactly what the show should be, send them off with a blueprint for, who the first 10 guests are and what should the arc be for the first season and all of that. And then because we have this super, talented pool of audio professionals, we actually do staffing as well. So we can play matchmaker and say, here's the right producer to help you get this MVP in this first season off the ground, go forth. And we actually use the talent pool for staffing for Spotify and Wondery and HBO as well, because they're constantly looking for talent for freelance projects that, again, don't need full service production, just need this certain kind of sound designer or this certain kind of scriptwriter. Cool, great. So, that's another way the marketplace and, ties into the creator economy as well. But for the clients who do need full service production, it's interesting. We tell them we're happy to do the teach you how to fish model, where we'll do the first season and then you can take it from there if you have some in-house resources. And they say, great, they're excited about that. But when we get to the end of the season, they're like, there's no way we can do this. We need you. And so we usually end up continuing on. I think 90% of our production clients end up re-upping with us because they see how much work goes into making something that is a well-told story. And, it's not just as simple as, the Narain model where you sit down, do very little research. I think he's gotten better about doing research. And I love Mark Narain, to be clear. But it's a very, lackadaisical, like, let's just shoot the shit for an hour and a half. And that's not what we're doing. We're planning and doing high quality, thoughtful content. And then there's the promotion piece. So the promotional and marketing piece, like, doesn't matter really how good something is. No one's going to listen to it unless you have a way to put it in front of them. And sometimes our clients do have a big enough newsletter or, community where they can push it out. We did one for Flow Health, like feminine health tracking app, and their app has millions of users. I can't even remember the right number, so I don't want to say the wrong one because it's whatever I'm thinking, it's 3 times that. And so they put the podcast out in their app and immediately had like insane listenership numbers. So to anyone out there who has an app, they just, come tell us about it because we can help you with that strategy as well. So a lot of what we do is thinking through what's the marketing and promotional strategy that we're going to do to get this out in the world and in front of the right people. Because podcast marketing is really different. Social media ads don't really work for converting to listeners and downloads. They're great for engaging with your existing audience, or as a branding play that this show exists. And, hopefully if someone sees it 4 times, they'll remember to go download it. But the things that really work for podcast marketing are cross promotions on similar shows and ads on the specific players and editorial promotion from Apple and Spotify. And so a lot of that is all relationship based. And so we already have those relationships. So it makes a lot more sense for us to at least do the marketing promotion for that launch season and get the audience to a certain place where it's easy to grow it. But you kind of have to hit that, 5,000-10,000 listener per episode mark before it becomes a stone rolling down the hill and can, grow on its own.
Gotcha. So go ahead, Greg.
I was actually going to ask just a little bit, I guess, about related to what you were just describing, though, like number one or two parts, I guess, related to what you were just describing. You mentioned sort of scripting and the format. I'm kind of curious, are there any universal truths you've seen like that are more successful? Obviously I know like a lot of it depends on like the personality of the people who are involved. Like Ken and I don't script anything, as you can obviously tell. But I don't know, perhaps, it's an interesting question, right? Like, should we script what we do, right? Like, would we do better? We plan our questions ahead of time, right? But we don't script out too much. But I'm kind of curious, there's so many different formats and styles now that evolved. I'm kind of curious if, sometimes you want to stand apart by coming up with a new format or something like that. But are there any universal wins there? And then the second part related, I guess, is in terms of understanding success, like, what are the KPIs that people should be thinking about? And like, what does success look like? And obviously that's all relative as well, I guess, based on your means and your needs. But I'm just kind of curious for some steering directionality, I guess, like in those areas.
Yeah. So it really depends in terms of scripting. It depends on the show format. So when we're doing something that is largely interview, same exactly what you're talking about. So we'll do a backgrounder, of course, for the hosts where we're preparing just like, here's everything that's interesting about the guest and that's relevant. We're preparing a list of suggested questions. And then we generally do script the intro and the outro. But ideally, we're getting to the point where the host is just using that as the guide, but we don't obviously want them to sound like they're reading it. So they might do it 5 times. And by the time they get to the 5th one, it's coming out really naturally. And so it's just meant to be a guideline. We will, after we cut the interview, generally script transitions and anything that we need for a segue in there. Sometimes we'll do the intro and outro after, because now we know what parts of the interview we're going to use. So we can really tailor the introduction and the outro with a teaser for the next episode to the content that we know we're going to be using. Especially if you have a long and winding conversation, we really love a tight edit, and I think listeners do too. So if we're cutting down, 75 minutes to a tight 28-minute interview, then you're not going to touch on all the topics. And so that's when we might want a custom intro, and we might record it afterwards. Now, if we're doing a narrative show where it is going to be largely a voiceover, or the host is taking us through a story, whether that's a true crime or an art heist or what have you, then we are going to have a lot more scripting, and the writing really matters. We want it to make sure that people are engaged, but we also want it needs to be interspersed with the interviews and archival tape and music, so that it's keeping the engagement level up, especially when it's just one narrator. We're sort of programmed to start to tune out after a while, no matter how interesting the story is, because it becomes monotonous. So being mindful of that and making sure that we're keeping the energy up. And even with a one-on-one interview show, we will block out segments and certain kinds of games to, depending on, for like people, we'll have a game. So it's keeping the energy really high, and making sure that the guest knows to expect, okay, first we're going to do this segment, and then that segment, and then the third one, so you don't lose their attention during it. And then, of course, you have fiction shows where everything is scripted, and you might even have a full cast. That's a totally different animal.
So how do you keep these podcasts authentic? I think that's what people want to listen to. In most cases, they want to say, like, I'm listening to something, this is truly authentic. This is not something that's going to sell me. You don't necessarily want to be listening to a company's like their keynotes 24/7, right? Every week, here's a new keynote, here's a new keynote. Like, okay, that can be tiring. You feel like you're being sold to.
Yeah.
And it's easy to understand for like media companies that you work with, like how to create something authentic. Like, oh, okay, this is something I can relate to. Same thing from a entertainment side, from like Netflix or Spotify, or Wondery or NBC News. But what about with your more corporate entities, corporate?
Yeah.
What advice would you give them? What do you give them in terms of saying, hey, you want to create a podcast? Great. Here's how you can make it, get your message across, but still get people interested and not feel like they're always being sold to.
Yeah, that is the magic. And I think there are three main things that we do to ensure that that is going to be the case in the finished product, because we want it to be something we're proud of, right? So the first is in the vetting process when we haven't yet engaged the client and we're deciding whether or not to take the project on. I think that you can get a pretty good read for that. Are they just looking to make an ad? Do they have an agenda that we cannot find an interesting story or way into? Then this should just be an ad. So let's just cut you a fantastic 60, 90-second ad that you can put on, the relevant business podcast or startup podcast or what have you. And that'll be the smarter strategy if that's really their goal. But most clients understand, these are heads of marketing. They understand that it needs to be like a hide the spinach in the smoothie sort of situation. And so that the second thing that we do is really during the development process, let's figure out what the compelling story and through line and hook is going to be, that we can bring in real human interest stories that someone would want to listen to, even if it wasn't a branded. Like that's the sniff test, right? Is like, would someone hit play on this and have no idea who made it, and still just be like, that was a great show, I need to recommend that to a friend. The third thing is, and this doesn't always make sense, but a lot of times for a branded show or show from a certain entity, it can make sense to have an outside host. So the one we did for Optum about fixing the broken healthcare system, called Until It's Fixed, we brought in a journalist to be the host so that it was, an impartial third party at the helm. And I think that was really smart and important for that one, given the subject matter. So I feel like those are the three main things. And then it's just touch points all the way through. I think we'll even have a code word sometimes where we can tell them and be like, we're drifting into ad territory. And they're like, oh, you're right. Okay, we'll reword that. But yeah, it's something that we're constantly monitoring for, because we want to be proud of what we make.
Yeah. And what kind of budgets are these companies, estimated budgets, are you seeing them willing to spend on a podcast? Because obviously, like it's one thing to say for an individual like Greg and I, like we spend very minimal. We're not super polished, and but if we were like, hey, Rachel, can you help take this podcast to the next level?
Yeah.
Like how much type of time and commitment would there need to be? And this is, I guess this is very similar for individual creators and also those internally at these companies. They're not full-time creators, they're part-time
Right.
creators. So what kind of commitment on like financial and time would you expect these people to need to spend or use?
Totally. So the time question, I mean, that's the reason that you do hire us, because it gives you back so much of your time, whether you're a person or an organization. We are your creative collaborator, but we are ultimately executing on all of the editorial, all of the logistics, all of the, scheduling guests and getting them ready to record, making sure they have what they need for equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously managing all of the post-production process. And so you, the client, at that point, you just get to be the creative and just make creative decisions, and the talent potentially if you're the host of the show. But that's it. All you have to do is make decisions at these, few milestones along the way, especially after we've done the development workshop and we know exactly what we're making. So the time question means that you get a lot of that back. And that is one of the reasons that so many companies work with us, because they have, to your point, 10 other initiatives going on this quarter. And this is just one of them.
Right.
So putting that in the hands of someone with a solid track record and a full team where they know that it's going to get done and get done well to their liking, I think is key. The money question is trickier. Obviously, for independent creators, we frankly don't work with very many because, you know, if we have a team of 6 on a given project, that's just going to be a hefty bill for an independent person to handle. Although we do have a couple, I can't talk about them yet, but we have a couple coming down the pipe I'm excited about, where it is that, you know, one person who's just doing well for themselves. For brands, generally our minimum, you know, we love to do at least a season of 10 episodes to start. Anything less than that, we'd have to charge so much per episode because we're getting this whole machine up and running. It just doesn't really make sense. We can do it, but it would be so expensive that I don't think it would make a ton of sense. So usually, you know, a season 1 episode of 10 is where we start. And that can be as low as 40. So 40,000 is usually like the buy-in for the simplest format show. And then as we're adding more guests or segments or script writing, if it's narrative, that's, you know, it can climb and be as high as, I think we've got one for an entertainment company related to superheroes that I cannot name. And, you know, that is well north of 6 figures. So there's a wide array, obviously, in that world. And then we do also recommend that whatever you spend on production, you spend at least half of that on marketing and promotion, especially for a first season where you're launching a new show.
Gotcha. Cool. Oh, okay. Well, I guess 1, that's awesome, but 2, definitely we can't do that.
No, but if you guys did want a producer editor, we could tap into the staffing.
No, I hear you. No,
find you the right person.
Look, hiring, you know, 2 people would cost you that much, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised, I guess, at the rates per se.
Well,
right?
and if you think about video, you know, a 3-minute video could be $500,000. So depending on, when you compare it to how much, like, the quantity and quality of content you're getting, it's still a bargain, I think.
But I guess I like that metric you had, though, about like sort of planning the budget, or the marketing part built into the other part. Because you know, Ken and I are at stage 2, but we have none of the things you mentioned in stage 2.
Wait, we're stages for us? I just figured just like we
have no budget, so you know, it probably explains a lot. But I guess you know, we have a lot of founders that watch our show as well, and I guess I'm curious, what advice would you have, you know, for someone on their way to being able to afford your services? Like, how you know, what's the starter kit for a founder that, you know, you like, if you're coaching someone to get to you, right?
Yeah.
What do you tell them? How do you get them going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the development workshop, I mean, we'll do a consultation with anyone who's curious, who's thinking, do I need an audio strategy? Sure, come to us and we'll talk it through, and we'll let you know. We'll let you know honestly. If the answer is no, we'll tell you that. But I think that the great place to start is a development workshop. So with that time, it's generally 3 or 4 sessions over a month where we're figuring out what should your long-term audio strategy be, and the flagship podcast goes along with that. So if your goal is monetization and you eventually want to build out a small network like the TED network, for example, then we would be doing like the 5-year plan and then figure out what the first show should be so that we can use that to do the spin-offs and start there. Vice versa, if you're like, this is our content and marketing plan for the entire year, how can podcasts or audio support what we're doing? So it's more of that content marketing side. Then we're probably just figuring out what that one show should be. And we're going to spend all of our time exploring the different concepts and guests and formats that it could take. And then we'll have the blueprint. At the end of that, you walk away with like a full treatment timeline and budget, as well as recommendations for teams. So even if you did want to go do it yourself, you absolutely could. And we'd tell you how. And then at that point, if you decide you want to engage us to do the production, then we can also do that. So that's a great starting place, because at the very least, you end up with recommendations for what your strategy should be, what your first show should be, and you know what that plan should look like to get it off the ground.
So let's talk in terms of the post-production side of things, like the building a community and the marketing side. What are some of the, I guess it's the that whole field of dreams approach. People like, oh, if you build it, they will come. It's like, okay, you build a podcast and you assume people are going to want to listen to it, right? You know, that's not actually the case, correct? I mean, it's like because
Not anymore. No. Although I get annoyed when people are like, "Oh, podcasting's done. It's jumped the shark." I'm like, there are even if you look at Spotify's numbers with like all the anchor shows, it's 4 million, right? There's 4 million podcasts in the world. And if we think about how many YouTube channels there are, rather, like we are still in such early days. And you think of any vertical that isn't, startup founders, entrepreneurs, or true crime, like those two may be getting a little bit saturated, but nothing else is. Even in like the category of parenting, there's probably 10 good shows. So if you can just think of a different hook or different talent or different value prop, you can still break out in the category of talent. But I do think we're at the point where you would need at least a small budget to get things off the ground. And then once assuming you have made really good content and it is truly differentiated in a smart category, then I think you only need to, like, the hill that you need to get to becomes lower and lower. The bar gets lower and lower depending on how unique your content is, how high quality it is. It's offering something that doesn't already exist. Whereas if you're going to enter into a super crowded category with yet another armchair expert, you are really going to have to fight tooth and nail, and you need a lot of money to break through there.
So the podcast is not specifically just between, like, your work is not specifically with like the marketing team or the communications team or the social media team. You interact with many different departments, right? Because you factor in, okay, you have to find a talent to do this. You have to find ways to market it, to promote it, to push it out to social media. What about other things like the far-reaching implications with other product launches, or how it
Yeah.
relates to the app, uh, and those that are looking at maybe even products. So because it's like, how do you interact with like is the company exploring anything in Web3 or NFTs that this could be tied into? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
brands should know that this is not something that's specifically siloed into
It
one
shouldn't be.
department.
Yeah. So I think perfect example. Are you familiar with Archive yet? ARKIVE?
I've heard of them.
Yes. So they are launching soon, and it's a decentralized museum of culture. And so the specific, NFTs and items that make it into this museum are actually going to be voted on and chosen by the members, which is super cool. So we are making a podcast for them now that will tie to the launch. And unfortunately, I can't give away the concept, but it is very, very much supporting, what they're doing, and the launch of it, and has a lot of interactive pieces as well, because that's, core to who they are, which is so fun. So that's a really smart thing, where they came to us 6 months before they were launching, and they were like, we want to make sure that we're really taking a 360 approach. So obviously we're going to do the social media. We're going to have the interactive. I'm sure they've got a zillion partnerships going on, but what we're doing is specifically plugging into that launch and supporting the way that they're doing it even. So that's a really good one. But yeah, we are always asking in that first development session, where we're trying to figure out what are all the different things we have to work with in terms of resources and assets internally, whether that's talent, whether that's an incredible graphic designer, what have you. We're also trying to figure out what are your goals and the tentpole events that you have coming up that we could be supporting. And a lot of times it's like an author who has a new book coming out. So they will come to us, 6 months before the book launch and want a podcast. So they're building up a community before the book comes out. That's another really smart way to do it. So yeah, we are always looking out, like, what's your roadmap and what are the different initiatives that we can tie in and support in a smart way, and then hit our deadlines to make sure it all happens at the same time.
So in terms of these, I know you mentioned when I asked about like the time and commitment, your initial plans are for you like 10 episode, a one season, 10 episodes at a minimum, that you would prefer. Would you Are there any thoughts in terms of like saying, like, hey, I have a book launch coming out, right? And I just want to do one episode. I just want to do a simple podcast episode, right? Maybe an hour, right? Or something like that. Put it out there. is that necessarily a bad thing? Or should I stop at one season? Should I, like, if I want to just do it as a season because it might be tailored to a specific campaign, right? To, hey, we just have this new fashion line, right? Maybe like, for example, fashion, somebody that's into fashion, right? That for like maybe L'Oreal, maybe for around Fashion Week. Okay, let's do a season, 10 episodes around this year's Fashion Week or whatever,
Hmm.
and just stop. Like, is there anything wrong with just doing one season, like a one season thing, and then that's it?
There's not. I would say that you're going to get more bang for your buck over time if it's something that's evergreen. So I think podcasts are really incredible for like educational content, or, we have a lot of companies that we make internal podcasts as part of their training, or even in the age of remote, there's a couple that we do where it's just getting to know new employees. So it'll be like a 5-minute interview with, the new people who join the company. Obviously, that's a big company that has
Right.
lots of people joining. So it's really, really good for those. You absolutely can do a one-off season that's promoting some big initiative that you've got. But I would say that it should be part of an ongoing podcast effort and be a feature or a mini series within that. Otherwise, you're going to spend all of this time and effort on launching a new podcast, which is not a small endeavor to grow the audience for that, unless you're really doing it like a year, 6 to 12 months out ahead, when you probably should have spent those resources doing something more closely tied to the campaign itself. But I did like your idea. You said like doing just one episode. So I actually think of that more like if you have a newsletter that goes out, there are a couple that I love that have an audio version just at the top, just
Right.
linked the file that where you can listen to the newsletter if you want instead of reading it. And I love that. And so that becomes their podcast. And it's just them reading the newsletter. It probably takes you all of 15 minutes to produce if you're doing it yourself. You're just taking out a couple ums and ahs. But I think that's a great, I don't know if we'd call that a podcast unless you're also putting it out on the RSS feed. But I actually think that can be a really cool initiative to have an audio piece to something that you're already doing.
Yeah, it seems like with some marketing campaigns, some companies might be like, oh, all right, so we'll put out this to promote this product or whatever. We'll put out we'll do a microsite. We'll do an email to our customers. We'll obviously do some ads. We'll promote it on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, blah blah blah. Have some nice little graphics. And oh well, what else can we do to hype this up? Okay, well, let's do a
Yeah.
podcast. But then it's like, oh, we're launching tomorrow. It's kind of late for us to do it to spin up a podcast, or we're launching in a week. It's like,
Mhm.
how do we can't exactly have that, you know.
But imagine if with that newsletter, there was an audio version linked and I got to hear the founder's voice talking about how excited they were about X, Y, or Z. Because again, it's that emotion and that passion that you can hear in someone that you kind of can lose over a newsletter, especially when we're all skimming it. We're looking at the 3 bullet points. We're looking to see if there's a discount in here. And otherwise, we're like, great, new feature. But if I had even a 4-minute, audio spot where I could actually hear the founder's voice and how excited they were and why this matters, I don't know. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. So it's also just the novelty of it. I think people would click on that.
Interesting. Greg, any final questions that you have?
I guess just, we always like to try to look forward a bit. Where do you think it's going? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What's next? With, a lot of folks, I think, thought, like social audio and live audio was going to be the thing. And that was, obviously it's not that I never thought it was going to be the end of podcasting, but what do you think comes next for, for this ecosystem? And are you advising your clients to start thinking about anything new, metaverse and all these other types of
Yeah.
to express yourself?
Well, I have to say, I'm a fan of edited content. I like mine curated. So I have been interested to see, that Spotify shuttered Green Room. And I think that had such a moment during the pandemic that now that people are, outside and have social lives again, we've definitely seen a dip. So what I'm actually advising clients is that they really need to be thinking about, or letting us think about, what the visual of their podcast should be. And that doesn't mean not everyone needs video, but YouTube is the second biggest audio platform in the world for podcasts, certainly internationally. And so we have come up with a few different ways where obviously we record video, great. We splice it together just like this with its template, looks great. But for shows that don't want audio, whether it's sensitive material or it's harder to get guests to say yes, especially with our A-list talent where they're like, if I don't have to do hair and makeup, I'm there tomorrow, you know? So we have a lot of different ways that we can create an engaging visual, whether it's, you know, the show art that has just a little movement. So it's, you know, a good backgrounder. We've even made some listening environments where it's an animated illustration of the world in which the podcast is taking place that are incredible. So that's what we're trying to move clients to now, making sure that the podcast does live on YouTube because it's so searchable. It's so good for discovery. So many people do like watching podcasts there, even if they're listening as a backgrounder. So that I think is going to be really, really important for the future. And then also this is more for the media companies, but obviously the, you know, the pipeline of podcasts to TV and film is getting more exciting every day. And I think that media companies should be thinking about that now, or any company that has, you know, a documentary under their belt or something. Like there's no reason you shouldn't do the audio version of it first because it's so much less expensive, but it's better than, I think it's better than a book because you can hear real voices. It makes the story come to life in a different way, where then a development executive at TV or film studio can hear it, can see it, can know what this would look like. So I just think it makes it more ripe for adaptation. So if you are somewhere in the media world thinking about that, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, which is so exciting.
Cool. I guess my final question is, what do you tell your clients, or what would you tell creators or podcasters to motivate them to continue doing their shows? Because at some point, it can feel like, oh, you're not getting the necessary traction because everyone has different KPIs.
Yeah.
Everyone has different metrics, you know, especially in the corporate world. But for like Greg and I, ours would be like, oh, are we getting listeners? Are we getting people watching or people downloading or reaching out to us? Um, so it can kind of feel a bit demoralizing for
Mhm.
people. What would you tell, like, they might come into you like, you know, after 5 episodes, like, Rachel, like, we're not seeing the traction. How do we like we just want 86 the whole thing. Like, what would you
Yeah.
tell them to do? What would your advice be to them?
It's hard because so many folks are doing this alone. You know, it is a really like it's often a 1, 2, or 3 person venture, and it can feel really, really hard and really like you're, you know, in a silo chugging along, and that you can't see that it's going to be worth it in the end. But I think that the best thing you can do is plug into communities with folks who are in the same position. So, you know, obviously Pod People is one of them, but there's so many. There's so many awesome communities out there, both for amateur and for professionals who are working on podcasts. I know there's a bunch of Discords. So Nick Qua over at HotPod, he recently sold HotPod to Vox, but he created a great Discord with a few other journalists that were all, it was related to Audio World. I can't remember the name of it right now, but I'll send it to you. And there's so many Facebook groups. The New York Times has a great Facebook group for podcasts and podcast listening, but there's a lot of professionals in there. I think it's really important that you have people, whether it's Slack or Discord or Facebook group, that you can be talking about these things to, and then facilitating cross promos with them as well. So it's like I love cross promos because you're getting the community and the networking within the industry, as well as the boost from listenership. So that's really great. There's also so many good newsletters, which I think reading about the industry, whether it's the news of podcasts and audio industry, or just there's a lot of good ones that are like recommendations, just makes you feel like you're plugged in. And you can also pitch your show to these newsletters so that it gets featured, which has a really great lift because it's a link that people can actually click. So those are really effective. Yeah, I mean, the answer is always community and feeling like you're not alone, you know, and that you can ask people questions and be like, what am I doing wrong here? Does anyone have an idea for a show that we should guest on each other's or do a cross promo? I mean, that's when it starts to feel like you're on a team, even if it's just within the industry.
Cool. Well, thank you, Rachel, for joining Greg and I on this episode of the Created Economy. It's been so great, and especially hearing about the future of podcasting and what you're doing. Congratulations with Pod People, and for everyone that
Good
wants to
job
know
making Ken feel inadequate in all of our podcasting
I'm
failings.
sorry, you're not. You guys are doing better than most. Most people quit after 3 episodes.
I mean, this is basically Greg just slave drives. He's like, okay, I'm just like, okay, when are we starting? Are we supposed to be doing episodes or whatever? He's like, no, just keep going, just keep going. I'm like, okay, and I'm starting to upload this stuff onto Anchor, and I'm like, and they have the little Anchor has this whole like, what season, what episode? I'm like, okay, season 1, episode 45. I'm like, this is like longer than a typical season for Law and Order. Like, what the hell? Like, at which point do we
It's
break
the same length, actually, as a typical Law and Order
That's really
season.
funny.
Yeah.
Did you know that you can do video on Anchor now?
Yes,
We
I
are.
Cool.
Ken put all of our videos into Anchor.
Greg,
Awesome.
you're not allowed to say we.
I said,
I did not, Greg.
yeah. So all of the bad videos that you see on Anchor, Ken uploaded those.
Rude.
It's always something that he turns it around. Mike, is there a way? And let me ask you, Rachel, is there a way that we can just like censor, like block off this little square here so Greg is not showing it?
And we need some deep fake technology to remove Ken.
Ken, you know you need the tension for any good story. You need the valleys as well as the peaks. It's very important that we're all along for this ride.
You're never, as what I've learned from journalism, you're never supposed to make yourself part of the story, though, Rachel. So it's like you're supposed to be observing other people having
this commentary. This is, you know, we're not news here, Ken. You should know better.
Well put. But anyways, for more information about Pod People, check out podpeople.com, podpeople.com, and check out and for more questions, any questions you have, ping Rachel. She's a person. And
happy to.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us. And for those that are interested, as we've been talking about, you can check out all these episodes of The Created Economy on your favorite podcasting app. And just because Greg needs to be educated, you can find it on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Google, Stitcher, Castbox, Amazon, and Audible. I think that's all of them. I don't know. I
need to remove all the fake ones you was mentioning.
I'll eventually put it into like, you know, whatever MySpace has for their podcasting app.
Oh my God. Can you imagine?
I just heard Napster got bought again also, and LimeWire.
That has changed hands more times than wow.
We're just waiting for real networks to just come back, you know. And actually, I think real networks are still around, but I don't think they're actually necessarily in the media player space anymore because I don't have to update my Windows PC anymore with their stuff. So. All right. Well, thank you, Rachel, once again, and we will chat with you. Hopefully, let us know what else is coming out. People, we're happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, let me know if you need a refresh because things are changing all the time. Obviously, very new industry, which is what I love about it. It's so messy, and we're kind of making our own rules as we go along, which is my favorite. But thank you so much. This was super fun.
Pleasure.
So happy to join anytime. Answer all the podcasting cues.
Bye.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it. All right. Oop, putting Greg on the big screen. There we go. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Check back for more episodes of The Created Economy on our YouTube and also anywhere you listen to podcasts. Cool. And with that, we bid you all a fond farewell, and we will check in with you later on. See you later.